first one is gonna be a topic about history, and the second one, another of your favorite conspiracy theorist stories. So now, join me to start this. The European Alliance System, 1871, 1914. The emergence of a powerful, unified Germany in 1871 threatened the European balance of power that had been nurtured by Metternich and his successors since 1815. However, Bismarck was not interested in expanding German power or territory, merely in maintaining its current dominant position and preserving peace on the continent. Three Emperors League. Three Emperors League. Bismarck was aware that the most serious threat to peace came from France, which nursed powerful grievances against Germany for the loss of Alsace and part of Lorraine. Following its defeat in the Franco Prussian War, he sought to isolate France, firstly by forming the Three Emperors League with Australia, Austria, Hungary, and Russia in 1873. This was not a straightforward achievement since Austria Hungary and Russia had rival ambitions in the Balkan lands of the declining Ottoman Empire. Triple Alliance. Triple Alliance. Realizing that the alliance between Austria and Russia was probably unsustainable in the long run, Bismarck secured a secret agreement with Austria Hungary and Italy in 1882, called the Triple Alliance. He maintained friendly relations with France by encouraging its colonial expansion in North Africa. When the Three Emperors League expired in 1887, Bismarck replaced it with a reinsurance treaty with Russia, in which Germany recognized the Balkans as being within the Russian sphere of influence. It also pledged German neutrality in the event of a war between Austria Hungary and Russia, and similarly, Russian neutrality in the case of a war between Germany and France. Bismarck also informally agreed with Britain that Germany would neither compete for colonial territory in Africa and Asia, nor construct a large fleet to challenge Britain's naval supremacy. Franco Russian Alliance. Franco Russian Alliance. All this careful diplomatic work began to unravel in 1890 with the accession of the hot headed new German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II. The emperor's incautious approach to foreign affairs brought him into conflict with Bismarck and prompted the latter's resignation. When Wilhelm refused to renew the alliance, duly signed in 1894, under this agreement, each country pledged its support to the other in the event of a war with Germany. Now, Germany was faced with the prospect of having to fight a war on two fronts. Wow. Triple Entente. Triple Entente. There you go. Hi, what the Sigma? Thank you so much for being back there, what the Sigma. Triple Entente. While Bismarck had been content with maintaining Germany as the dominant power on the European continent, Wilhelm had more global ambitions. Under his direction, Germany began an aggressive campaign of colonial expansion, directly competing with British economic interests in southern Africa. Wilhelm further alarmed Britain by embarking on a massive program of naval construction. Britain had previously adopted a stance of splendid isolation from European affairs. But in 1904, the British government concluded an agreement with the French in the common interest of reigning in Germany. In 1907, a similar agreement was reached with Russia, and the Triple Entente was formed. Chain reaction. Chain reaction. Thus, an alliance system evolved in which the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria Hungary, and Italy was ranged against the Triple Entente of Britain, France, and Russia. Hi, Sue Bullock. With each country guaranteed the support of its allies in the event of conflict with a member of the opposing alliance, there now existed the danger of a chain reaction leading to a Europe-wide war. The alliance system was tested numerous times between 1907 and 1914. In the Agadir crisis of 1911, Germany, with colonial ambitions in North Africa, sent a gunboat to Moroccan port of Agadir, nearly sparking a war with France. Balkan tensions. Balkan tensions. However, the most likely flashpoint for a conflict was the Balkans. The region seethed with nationalist. Okay, so the region seethed with nationalist sentiment, with its many small states desiring self-determination. Austria opposed these causes, fearing they might inspire independence movements among the minority groups within its own empire. Thank you for all the likes you're giving me, guys. Thank you for that. It's encouraging. In 1908, Austria decided to make a show of power in the Balkans by annexing the provinces of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This outraged Serbia, which had its own designs in Bosnia due to the many Serbs living there. Russia sided with Serbia, and Germany supported Austria. War looked likely until Russia, still recovering from defeat to Japan, backed down. Tensions rose again, once again with the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913, a conflict between several Balkan states from which Serbia emerged strengthened and enlarged, alarming Austria and Germany, which viewed Serbia as a satellite of Russia. What are you reading? I'm reading The History of the World, and as the title says, specifically the European Alliance System, 1871, 1914. Preparing for war, preparing for war. In the years before 1914, all the major powers believed war was likely and made suitable preparations. Each country enlarged its army through conscription and worked on rapid mobilization plans. Germany developed the Schlieffen Plan to enable it to fight a war on two fronts. Advances in military technology increased the destructive power of armed forces. Machine guns and artillery could fire more rapidly and accurately than ever before. Railways could be used to speed up the movement of troops and supplies to the front. In 1906, Britain perfected the Dreadnought, the first modern battleship. Heavily armored, steam-driven, and with greater firepower than any contemporary ship, its launch marked the beginning of a naval arms race with Germany. Here, there's a picture that says the arrival at Agadir of the gunboat Panther aroused anxiety about German intentions in both Britain and France. There you go. Well, that was all for history. And now we're going to read a delightful reading, sorry about that, about conspiracies here. And today's conspiracy theory is Today's conspiracy theory is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Let's take a read. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Syphilis. Is that the correct way to pronounce? Oopa. Syphilis. Syphilis. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which was run between 1932 and 1972, was one of the most shocking scientific studies ever to take place. In it, 399 black men, most of whom were poor Alabama sharecroppers, took part in a supposed treatment for bad blood, which would cure them of illness. They were never told that their illness was syphilis and that, except at the beginning of the study, they were receiving no treatment at all. What was in fact happening was that doctors were studying the ravages of the untreated disease and waiting for them to die so that they could perform autopsies on the corpses. The supposed aim of the experiment was to find out more about the disease and to determine whether it affected black people differently to white people. However, at the end of the study, which continued over several decades, it was suggested that no important knowledge had been yielded. Meanwhile, many men had met their deaths after terrible illnesses whose symptoms include paralysis, blindness, heart disease, tumors, and insanity. Not only this, many of the men's wives had become infected and their children born with congenital syphilis. Special free treatment. The study was started at the Tuskegee Institute under the auspices The study was started at the Tuskegee Institute under the auspices of the United States Public Health Service. Its initial aim was to study a group of black men with untreated syphilis for a period of months and then treat the disease. Hi, Nasi Umu Jaman. However, several of the doctors wanted to continue the program for a longer period and fearing that the men would not want to cooperate if they knew the truth. That they were being studied to see how long it took them to die of the disease. The doctors began to misrepresent what was going on. They began to write to their patients advertising a special free treatment when all they were doing was performing diagnostic tests. These included painful and dangerous lumbar punctures from which the patients derived absolutely no medical benefits at all. Shameful ethics. Penicillin became the standard treatment for syphilis in 1947, and there were government initiatives to treat the population in as rapid a manner as possible. Nationwide campaigns invited citizens to attend treatment centers, and men who were called up into the army were screened for the disease and given treatment. Subjects of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, however, were excluded from the program, but they accepted the story that they were being treated already. In this way, syphilitic men were prevented from gaining treatment that would have saved their lives. Here we have two pictures. In one, Black American combat airmen, 1942, trained under the Tuskegee program. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment was less well publicized, however. And here in this picture, we have A man is x-rayed in the Tuskegee syphilis experiment in 1932. The experiment engendered significant distrust among the African American community. Engendered significant distrust. There you go, a man is x-rayed. It was not until 1966 that the story broke in the national press. Peter Buxton, who worked for the Public Health Service in San Francisco as a venereal disease investigator, became aware of the experiment and wrote to his superiors to inform them of what was going on. However, he was told that the experiment needed to go ahead and that it would not be curtailed until all the subjects had died and the autopsies had been performed. Frustrated by this brush off, Buxton went to the press, and in 1972, several national newspapers ran stories on the experiment. The experiment was quickly brought to a halt as a result of the adverse publicity, and the surviving subjects and their families compensated and promised free medical treatment in the future. 2 years later, legislation was put into effect to regulate medical experiments involving human beings. However, it was not until 1997 that a public apology was made by the President of the United States. In the presence of the five remaining survivors of the study, only eight were left in total. President Clinton formally apologized for the behavior of the United States government and called it shameful. Here we have 94-year-old Herman Shaw, right, speaks as US President Bill Clinton looks on during ceremonies at the White House in May 1997, in which Clinton apologized to the survivors and families of the victims of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. There you go. There's Bill Clinton apologizing to those guinea pigs that were used in this syphilis experiment. A conspiracy against ethnic minorities. The fact that the study was conducted on Black people led many to accuse the scientists who mounted it of racism. However, this was complicated by the fact that several of the staff in charge of the experiment were African Americans. The experiment was also conducted under the auspices of one of America's most respected Black universities, the Tuskegee Institute, set up by Booker T. loaned medical facilities to the Public Health Service in order that they could conduct the experiment, and local African American doctors also became involved. One of the central figures in the drama was a Black nurse called Eunice Rivas. She had worked with the subjects for nearly 40 years and was trusted by most of them. Defending her behavior, she claimed that she was simply carrying out the orders of the doctors and was not in a position to diagnose the patient's illnesses. Strangely, both Black doctors and nurses felt that they were helping solve the problem of venereal disease in the Afro American community, and they were deeply committed to health programs that helped the poorest people in their area. Macon County. It was as if they simply could not see that human beings should not be treated in this way, as just a means to an end, even in the course of a supposedly extending medical knowledge. Also perplexing is the way in which the study was set up. Once it had been dismantled, many questions were asked. Why, for example, had it been thought necessary to find out the differences between the progress of the disease on white people and Black people? The study was set up to find out whether it was true that Black people experienced cardiovascular problems as a result of syphilis infection, whereas white people were more susceptible to neurological malfunctioning. But how this information would have helped treat the disease remains unclear. Not only that, but the scientific methodology in the study was flawed. The investigation was designed to show how the disease progressed when untreated, but the subjects had already been treated with contemporary treatments such as mercurial ointments in the first few months of the program before it was decided to extend the study. The thinking behind the experiment was so unclear that the scientific gains were so questionable that one can only assume that an extraordinary level of possibly unconscious racism must have blinded the scientists to the fact that they were treating their subjects in a completely unhuman way. In several later sociological studies, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was shown to have had an adverse effect on health programs directed to African Americans who, unsurprisingly, increasingly mistrusted the public health authorities. The episode caused lasting damage, and it is remembered as one of the most appalling conspiracies ever to take place in the American history. Last picture says a doctor injects a subject with a placebo during the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. There you go. And that's the last picture for today's reading, guys. Thank you, girls, for being back there. And I will see you tomorrow with a couple of readings that I will know, I'm sure positive, are going to be of your interest. Thank you so much and see you tomorrow.